I have the pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Ethan Weiss, Consul General of Israel in Los Angeles. Mr. Weiss is an experienced diplomat with proven capabilities to advance national and local agendas and interests, skilled in public affairs, national security, public appearance, speech writing, foreign affairs, politics, my God, keeps going on, commercial cooperation, policy analysis, and a very capable performer with high education and experience. It is an honor to introduce you to Mr. Weiss. Thank you, sir.
Can anyone hear me if I stand here? I don't like to hide behind the podium. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for letting me hear how my eulogy, my funeral, may be if I should die now. The location is definitely an interesting location. Nevertheless, I think it's a start of bar mitzvahs, weddings, and a one-stop shop, as we call it. I apologize if I'm kind of losing my voice. I was busy doing a lot of public speaking in the past couple of days since what happened in Poway. But let me start by asking you guys sitting in the room, did anyone visit Israel? Why are you smiling?
Because not just one. I visit you,
because whether you know, whether you're aware of it or not, but Israel, or what's coming out of Israel, is something that you use on your day-to-day life, your business, your phones, your cars, everything. A lot is coming out of this small country that, by the way, was just ranked the eighth most influential country in the world. And I'm talking about a country that's the size of New Jersey, roughly, 1/8 of California, about 9 million inhabitants, and yet a lot of the tech, a lot of the know-how that is being used around the world comes from there. Now, what makes us special? That's a good question. A lot of people will say that's the Jewish mom that uses guilt to make us excel, because the dream of every Jewish mom is that you become a lawyer, become a doctor. I'm a diplomat, so you have to understand my mom is kind of disappointed, but nevertheless, only guilt. It's necessity. Because when you think about it, Israel exists for only 71 years, and from the day of our existence, even before that, we were pushed to the corner by our adversaries, our enemies. A lot of the Arab countries were surrounding us. And basically we were forced with a dilemma: either we survive or we die. And when you think of the context, and it's the serendipity is kind of amazing, because today in Israel we are commemorating the Holocaust Remembrance Day. Now, when we built the country, it was just a couple of years after almost 50% of the Jewish people were wiped out by the Nazis in Germany. So people were very much fueled to survive and to thrive, because the lessons of the Holocaust were learned, that we'll not let anyone dictate our future and our survivability. So that basically was the drive of the Jewish people to build this country and to excel and to succeed. Now, when you think about it, it's an island of stability in a very turmoil Middle East. When you look at the countries that surround us, you understand that this is a very tough neighborhood. Now, when you're surrounded by many bullies, the only way you can survive is carrying a big stick. And thankfully, because of aid coming from the U.S. over the years, we carry a very big stick. A stick that, by the way, we share with you guys, so everyone is enjoying that stick. And that gave us the opportunity to develop technologies from agriculture, because Israel, 70% of it is a desert country. A lot of the tech on water and agro-tech comes from Israel, stuff that you use here. If you go to San Diego, let's say about 20% of the glass of water you're going to drink comes from Israel, because there's an Israeli desalination facility over there. Santa Barbara, just the same. Fruits, vegetables, the stuff you're eating here is being grown using Israeli tech. Irrigation systems, invented in the 60s in Israel. And all that is being used around the world, and we're very proud of it. So, our secret is the drive that comes from our Jewish moms, our, I would say, Jewish values, which are based on celebrating life, arguing a lot, eating a lot of good food, and especially enjoying life. Because you know that when you think about it, when your country is surrounded by so many enemies under the threat of countries like Iran and Lebanon, Syria, and other countries, you kind of think to yourself, I mean, these are poor people, right? They're suffering. They're like on the brink of war on every single day. Well, actually, we're not, because the Israeli people they're ranked as the most happiest people around the world. According to the UN Index of happiness, they measure how many people are happy around the world. Israel is ranked amongst the first 10. Usually in places 3 to 8. Varies every year, depends on taxes, of course. The more taxes we pay, the less happier we are. But I think that's a given. And even though this is a very thriving country, we're very happy people. Did you know, by the way, that Los Angeles is the 4th largest Israeli city around the world? We have almost 300,000 Israelis living in the valley, just in the valley. That's a big number. But that also shows you the connection, strong connection that Israel has with the U.S. It's more than two democracies running in a very hostile world. It's two people sharing a lot of the same values. We share the same strong values that let us thrive, and no one can say otherwise. Now, what happened in Poway a couple of days ago demonstrates one simple fact, and I'll just touch briefly on that, because the international environment does not operate in a vacuum. When something happens in Sri Lanka, or when something happens in Timbuktu, it pulls and affects other events around the world. Everything is intertwined. Because we can trace every act, whether it's anti-Semitism, hatred, or whatever you want to call it, comes from regimes who endorse it, promotes it, and supports it. One of them is the regime of Iran, the current regime of Iran. One of the strongest entities that fuels hatred, anti-Semitism, but more importantly, they pose a challenge to the values that all of us support. The way of life we adhere to, which is based on human rights, equality, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. All of those freedoms are under a huge challenge from these type of regimes. Because when you measure it, when you go to the UN is comprised of almost 200 countries. You know how many democratic countries exist around the world? I would say roughly 50, 60. Depends how you describe democracy. The rest are non-democratic countries. So when you see that the majority of the world is comprised of people who do not share the same values as we, or at least their regimes. And that's something that when you live in such a big island like the US, you sometimes tend to forget. Until something like, what happened in Poway takes place. So, our job here is to stand tall and fight against these types of discriminations, against this hatred that poses a threat to our values. That's why I'm losing my voice, because the past 3 days I was in and out of San Diego, meeting with families, meeting elected officials, talking to them about how we can prevent the next Poway, what we can do to prevent the next anti-Semite attack, against hatred attack, against various communities. No one has an answer, by the way. And that's, to me, is very troubling. But what we can do, we can stand against regimes like Iran and others who openly say we need to destroy Israel. We need to destroy the US. You know that in Iran we are called the big Satan and the small Satan, Israel and the US. You can only imagine who's big and who's small for those fellows. Nevertheless, that's what they're teaching their children. That's what they're teaching their people. That's why they're spending a lot of money to build terror infrastructure around the world. And that really scares me. By the way, when you read my eulogy, you forgot to mention I have a wife and 3 kids. I'm scared especially because of them. What kind of a future are we giving our kids, our family? So the only answer I can give you is that we do not take things lightly. We are never discouraged. We of course separate our well-being and our wishes to live happily and develop and create. I mean, I don't know if anyone heard, but it's very sad because whenever something amazing happens in Israel, something bad happens around the world, then the entire media attention goes to that. So the day that the Notre Dame burned down, an interesting Israeli company managed to print a heart, a human heart, a 3D viable heart that can work. They say that in a matter of 10 years, organ transplant will be a completely different thing because you will never need donors anymore. They'll simply take what they basically did. By the way, actually, it's a wide range of solutions because on the one hand, they took fat tissue, and from the fat tissue, they made stem cells. That's a new, by the way. Think about, Los Angeles, all plastic surgery, taking fat cells. It's a win-win situation for everyone. Using those stem tissues, they managed to create the heart. They managed to create the cells that builds a heart. And with a printer, 3D printer, they managed to print the heart. So you don't need any more donors. And more importantly, you will never need to take medications your entire life that will prevent the rejection of that organ. So hopefully in a matter of a decade, in 10 years, we have solved a huge, huge issue that affects everyone. Health comes from Israel. So as I said, we are keeping our ideals, interest in developing and creating, and on the other hand, we never let our guard down because we exactly understand who are the enemy. Who is the enemy? What are the challenges and how to stand against them? And thankfully, the strongest ally that Israel has is here. Not just the US administration, but the American people. Because the American people, as a rule, understands the importance of Israel. And this is something we work a lot to remind everyone. Because on a day-to-day basis, people never, they don't stop for a second and think, I wonder, where did this vegetable came from? I wonder, where did this new tech come from? People take everything for granted. So sometimes, my suggestion, pause for a minute and try to think on a larger scale. So, these are the remarks for now. You guys agree with this? If you have any questions about anything, don't be shy. So,
just for clarification,
yes.
Lebanon is not Israel's enemy. Lebanon has been invaded by foreign countries, and there's groups in Lebanon that will attack Israel. But Lebanon doesn't have the infrastructure to defend itself against these groups that are in Lebanon. But the people of Lebanon are not the enemy of Israel.
I'm not talking about people.
But it's not even
I cannot generalize,
right.
people.
But you mentioned
Leadership.
Lebanon.
Let's talk about leaderships. And by the way, according to the international law, there's still a state of war between Israel and Lebanon.
That's because that's political. The people of Lebanon are not the enemy of Israel. It's the people who invaded Lebanon, who created a war with Israel, but not.
So yeah, I'll elaborate a bit on that. Basically, what you're saying is that the Iranian regime, through Hezbollah, which is a terrorist organization, and by the way, mind you that Hezbollah is the largest non-governmental military around the world. They have ammunitions of almost 150,000 rockets. Actually, they have more rockets than the US Army has. All of them are aimed towards Israel, by the way. And this Ayatollah regime controls that terrorist organization. And that terrorist organization controls Lebanon. And if they really wanted to get rid of them, they could have.
They can't. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the money. Lebanon has been invaded by foreign countries, and they don't have the infrastructure, the money, or the manpower to get rid of them. They just don't. So,
I know what it was.
hmm?
I know what it was. Please.
Hey, Tom, thank you very much. Could you comment on this question? Historically, support, you talked about the support of the
Yes.
American people being a bedrock of the friendship between this country and Israel. And the bipartisanship that was so historic, there was support both Democrats and Republicans for decades and decades. And more recently, and I'm a Democrat, more recently my party, certain elements of my party, seem to have moved away from that friendship and have become very vocal critics. Could you comment on what the government thinks about that, and what is being done to maintain that bipartisan friendship?
Sure. First of all, you stressed and you mentioned something that's very important to know. That did you know that the first country ever recognized Israel was the U.S. President Truman. President Truman, an hour after, right? That's an anti-missile defense system in Israel that basically uses interceptors to take down rockets and missiles fired at Israel. 92% success. It's unheard of around the world. There's no such thing. There's no equivalent to that. And it's based on the ground, and it's battle proven for more than 10 years now. The U.S. Army has just purchased these systems, which, by the way, are also manufactured in Tucson by Raytheon. So whenever we make something that can save our lives, we share it with you guys, and you save your own lives with it, and our allies, which is also important. Yes, Ruben.
So thank you for joining us. Well, can you explain what is the BDS and how the business community can help you that issues?
Remember my earlier comment that in the international environment, everything is intertwined? So BDS is one of those examples, because BDS was created as an anti-Semite movement by Mr. Omar Barghouti, a very notorious activist and terrorist from Palestinian Authority. This guy, 2002 or 3, said, you know what, there's no way that we Palestinians can win against Israel on the battleground. There's no way we Palestinians can undermine the existence of Israel through battle. So the only way we can do it is through knowledge, or actually through ignorance. Because utilizing campuses and colleges around the world, and I'm very sad to say that unfortunately the attributes of young people who go to school today are not the same as they were a couple of years back. Why? Because of modern technology. Everything's so easy to them, is that they think that everything that they see is true or not true, and that's why they're so affected by social media and others. So this BDS movement was basically created to delegitimize the existence of the State of Israel through young audiences. How? By basically lying. Falsification of the truth. Now, the BDS movement never addressed a very important issue. What about Palestinians? All they do is hammer Israel by saying Israel is the sole proprietor, Israel is the sole blame for what's happening in the Middle East, which is, of course, not true. But when they utilize those lies, it really, sinks in with students who have no knowledge of what's happening around the world. Because an example that I can do a small experiment now. Everyone heard about the journalist, the Saudi journalist Khashoggi, right? And everyone heard that Saudi Arabia is behind that assassination, right? How does it make you feel towards Saudi Arabia and toward that case? Not good, right? But what if I tell you that a country like China puts Muslims in work camps? A country like Russia killed more than 1,000 journalists or made them disappear over the years. A country like Turkey puts thousands of journalists in prison. You didn't know that, right? When you take an image of someone, when you can associate a story of a person, it affects you immediately. But when you do not have a picture of someone, when you do not have a story about someone, you don't care, you don't know. Because Saudi Arabia is not the biggest enemy, it's not the biggest country or the baddest country around the world. There are far more worse countries than they are. Even Turkey. But everyone went out against Saudi Arabia. So the Palestinians did a lot of research on that. They know exactly what makes you tick. They know exactly what influences you. Underdog, everyone here roots for underdog. When you see someone weak holding a stone against a tank, you support the weak. But But when you take a couple of steps back from that image and increase the framework and the context, you understand that actually the boy holding the stone is not the weak. So, knowing that, they manipulate you so easily. Because, no offense to anyone in this room, the average American is gullible. And that's what they use. So our job is to try and expose these lies. Because whenever they'll publish something, for example, during last year, during the riots in Gaza, they published an image with Catherine Hagel, taken from ER, I think, or whatever that series was, and they had a Hamas, a terrorist organization, Hamas had a picture of Catherine Hagel with a paragraph saying that we have received international aid from doctors from all over the world coming to us, to Gaza to help us. She's not a doctor. They've taken an image from a series, and it was shared on social media, and everyone said, "Oh, that's amazing, good job, what a great doctor, blah, blah, blah." And then we exposed that, this is a lie, it's Catherine Hagel, and we showed a clip from the series, and everyone was like shocked. But then when they deleted it, at least 50,000 people saw it and said, "Good job." And there we go, it's deleted, and they didn't see the correction. Damage is done. So easily, these days, you can cause a lot of damage to people. So my suggestion to all of you, don't take everything for granted. Whenever you see something, always question it, investigate. Try to learn more before you come to a conclusion. Because of our traits as human beings. We're gullible. Any more questions? Excellent, great. Thank you very much, guys, for presence here at the cemetery.
Thank you so much, Mr. White, for those words. I want to give an example of ingenuity and the inventions that are coming out of Israel.
Your project with the autonomous cars, by the way.
Right. Yeah. And there's another one that's still being worked on. There's another one. There's something called Ambucycle. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah, Ambucycle. That's right.
What it does is it's a motorcycle. It's basically an ambulance on a motorcycle that can reach places where the ambulance cannot, and it will administer the first aid, time-sensitive first
I'll
aid.
elaborate. This is a special organization in Israel called Hatzalah. It means help in Hebrew. This organization takes volunteers and train them to be paramedics. This organization gives them special bikes, motorcycles, which are basically comprised of a hospital. What they did, knowing the attributes of the hypochondriac Jewish mother, they took an entire hospital and put it on a motorcycle. Average response time is 90 seconds.
Wow.
90 seconds. Because the way it works is very simple. You have committed volunteers who are trained. And they're all around the country. And whenever something happens, the system finds the nearest one. They ask him, can you do something about it? If he says yes, he's on his bike in 2 seconds and on the scene in 90 seconds. What they do is they're the first responders before the big ambulances can come to the scene. And they save a lot of lives. And think about a place like Los Angeles that is very congested. Ambulances can sometimes get stuck on 405 or other roads, and it's very hard for them to pass. So with a bike, simply squeeze between the cars and you're on the scene.
Thank you. On the comment on the Ethan's speech on the BDS, Steve mentioned how important the elections, the activists and lobbyists on different levels, they are running for the different office, from the local office to high office at the Washington DC. You saw the different things. And recently, the NIAC, the famous lobbyist organization for the Islamic Republic of Iran, very active on the local level at the neighborhood councils, and they have a famous faces and the spokespersons running for the office on the local level. So that's important to come and make sure who you vote for. And these people, even though they had a power to split the neighborhood councils, they get the different groups organized. So if you really want to help the community, it's better to come and vote for the team you're going to make sure they are supporting the community, not foreign entities to working against the benefit of the local communities. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you for that, and on that note, thank you everybody for coming. There will be picture opportunities in